Hello and welcome to Woodworking in Progress. In this video series I'm going to show you how I made a gaming table. Really, I think it's the largest project I've ever taken on. You can see how much room it takes up in the shop. It's actually quite a challenge logistically. But I get started by building all of this, which I'm calling the base. We've got the frame, panels, legs, and the skirt. Let me show you how it all comes together. I started by planing the 2-inch thick oak for the legs down to 1.5 inches. It was going pretty well until the drive belt for my planer literally had a meltdown. After I dropped the planer off at the repair store, I moved on, took some 2x4s, and built the frame for the tables. The legs are going to be bolted into the corners of this frame, or the skirt pieces, with 4 bolts, 2 from the side, 2 from the front. What I needed to ensure was that the bolts won't run into each other. The holes need to be offset so we get a nice kind of interleaving effect and enable the leg to be secure. To do that, I actually made a little template. Now I used this on the prototype, it worked really well. So this is labeled side. So I use these holes here, place it on the piece of skirt, and mark that location. To make the holes on the front, I first flip it over and then turn it. Now I can read front, place it here, and mark those holes. This ensures that all 4 bolts are going to interleave very nicely. And the last thing I did was to countersink the holes, so when I place the bolt and the washer in, it's nice and flush with the skirt. With my planer fixed, I got the legs to the right thickness, then brought them over to the table saw to get a nice perpendicular cut on the long edge. After cutting them into their final size, I glued pairs of them up to make the corner legs. The playing surface is made from 6 panels of oak plywood. Now together it gives me a surface of 90 inches by 90 inches. I cut each piece on the table saw to be 30 inches wide and 45 inches tall. And the last step was to label them: back left, back center, back right, and the same again for the front. The next phase is to attach all the panels to the skirts. It's a pretty complex operation, so I'm doing it in, several phases. But I'm going to start with the back panels, the 3 of them: the back left, back center, and back right. So I've got one of the pieces of the skirts, the frame, and I'm actually going to make the back center the keystone panel. So all of the other panels will reference their position off of it. So I started with carefully positioning it so it was exactly where I needed it. I then drilled some holes and attached 2 screws on the outer edge, really, which looks at, it's the back. So that's going to be covered up by the rails eventually. To make sure that this panel is always correctly placed, I then went underneath the panel and I put a series of guide blocks in place. So the idea is that when you take this panel, it should just drop down. In fact, it can only drop down in one position, the correct position. So underneath, these guide blocks will attach into the 2x4 of the skirt. So with those in place, I could then move on to looking at the other panels. To do that, I started by drilling some dowel holes. I put 3 along the long edge, back to front, because that's where the back left and back right panels are going to go. And then I put 2 holes along the short edge of actually all 3 pieces, because that's where the front panels are going to go. So right here where I'm standing, I'm going to have another skirt and another 3 panels pushing in this way. So that's why those dowel holes are there. After that, I use my dowel centers to mark the correct holes for the dowels on the back left, back right, and found some places to drill screw holes for them into the skirt, and these 3 panels were then done. To put the front panels on, I had to start by actually attaching the two skirts together. Now it's a series of 5 bolts, and it gives me a frame that looks something like this. I could then start with my dowel centers to mark where the dowels went. I started with the front center panel and then the front left and right. Now, of course, things didn't go perfectly. I had to sand away some uneven parts and even re-drill some dowel holes. And I had to go back and fill in the wrong dowel holes so I didn't reuse them. In the end, I did get all 6 panels attached to the frame. Now, having successfully put all the panels into place, the next logical step, take them all away. That was so that I could clamp the legs into place, mark the location for the holes where I need to drill for the bolts. I then took the legs over to the drill press. Now, the corner legs, which are pretty thick, was actually a 2-step process because my bit wasn't long enough. So I drilled most of the way, then jacked it up on a couple 2x4s and completed the hole. I could then take all the legs back to the skirt and bolt them into place. To cover up the bolts, I made these little covers. So they needed to be sanded, holes drilled, and then I could attach them with screws. I then cut the longer pieces of veneer to go between the covers, applied glue, and attached them all with some brads. To put the last couple pieces on, I actually had to flip all of them over, join the 2 pieces, and then I could cut and install those pieces. This is because they go between the joined sides, and I wanted to ensure there were no gaps at all. Well, that's the end of this part of the project. So now I have a 7.5-foot square table in the garage, and it's quite a chore if I have to move it even just a couple inches. I got to take stuff apart, but well, that's part of the fun of the project, I suppose. Please come back next time and I'll show you how I build the rest of the project, the rails that are going to be the area for the players. So please join me then for more woodworking in progress.